Hello everyone, I welcome you to this CEC lecture series. I am Nupur Chawla, teaching English literature at Maitri College, Delhi University. And today's lecture is part of the ongoing series where we've been discussing important texts vis-a-vis feminism. And feminism, as we all know, is one of the literary theories or one can say schools of thought that has been widely discussed, that has been widely quoted, and it continues to remain relevant across decades until today itself. So the text that we are going to discuss today is a very important feminist essay which is titled Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex. Of course, this is, a part of the title because the essay title is longish. We'll, discuss at length the entire title because it has some important phrases. But for us, it's important to first place that it was written in 1989, and so that makes the essay, a text of the late 20th century, right? And it was written by Kimberly Crenshaw. Now, if we very quickly get to know a little about the writer, now Crenshaw was born in May 1959, and she's an American civil rights activist and a scholar of race-critical theory. She teaches at the UCLA Law School and also the Columbia Law School. So she's an active scholar even right now who thinks about the question of race, who thinks about the question of feminism. But you see, why is this text that we have taken up today very, very important? Because Crenshaw has contributed to the school of thought with a very, very important intervention, that is by talking about the idea of intersectional theory, right? And that's going to be, the center of our discussion today because that's what this essay, is very, very popularly known for. That how this essay advanced the idea of intersectional theory. This was the first time when Crenshaw, introduced this concept. And now this concept is, quoted widely by multiple scholars, and it's used to, interpret a lot of literary texts, and for that matter, even the reality of a lot of women around the world. So Crenshaw is actually then known for the introduction and development of the intersectional theory, which, if we look at the brief definition, it is, and I quote, the study of how overlapping or intersecting social identities, particularly minority identities, relate to systems and structures of domination or discrimination, unquote. So when we look at the term intersectional, before we unpack it in context of how Crenshaw looks at it, we understand that how intersectional theory becomes a study of the manner in which overlapping identities, right? Multiple identities, multiple social identities, particularly those, related with those on the margins. How these multiple identities together, kind of construct a way for us to understand structures of domination or discrimination, right? So what she's trying to say is that let's not separate the question of gender, the question of maybe caste or race marginality, but the need is to look at all these categories together. So that's what, simply put, is intersectional theory, right? Now we see then also that she is often associated with intersectional feminism, all right? Because very clearly we established that she has made important contributions in the field of both race and feminist theory. So her contribution then is through the introduction of the idea of intersectional feminism, which examines the overlapping systems of discrimination that women are subjected to due to their ethnicity, sexuality, and economic background. So this actually is a kind of a new brand of feminism, if you can call it that, where the focus is not just on the identity of an individual as a woman, and and the kind of experiences that impact her day-to-day life. Instead, at the heart of examination then are different other identities of the woman as well, the different subject positions that she acquires. That is, A, of being a woman, B, of what ethnicity that she may be a part of, what social group she may be a part of, what class or caste she may belong to, and even what kind of an economic background is she from. So how these different ideas come to construct the peculiar position of a woman is what Crenshaw wants us to focus on. So what she's then essentially doing is that she's, kind of expanding the frontiers of feminism, if we can call it that. Now, if we say that Crenshaw has actually authored many books, and she's of course still writing because she's active till date, but she started writing in the late 20th century. And the essay that's in our that's in discussion today is this essay which has the longish title, and let's look at the title. It is Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black Feminist Critique of Anti-Discrimination Doctrine, Feminist Theory, and Anti-Racist Politics. Now, of course, it's a very long title, but certain terms are crucial here. A, the word intersection, an intersection between the question of gender and race. B, the other question, the other important term that we notice here is, a critique of anti-discrimination doctrine. So what she's going to do in this essay is that she's going to revisit, all those parameters which help us address the idea of discrimination, and she's going to examine those parameters, whether those parameters are themselves sufficient enough to address the question of a black woman or not, right? So that's going to be one of her arguments that she makes. So then our takeaway becomes that we're going to focus on two things: A, the idea of intersection, and B, the idea of how Crenshaw constructs a kind of a critique of the anti-discrimination doctrine, again, particularly in the US, right? So even as apart from these two central arguments, there are other points that she makes in this longish essay, but our discussion is going to be centered around these two. So the first thing that we say about the essay is that Crenshaw attempts to broaden the feminist and anti-racist analysis in the essay. Now, what do we mean by broaden the feminist and anti-racist analysis? Which means that she's trying to push the limits of the theory of feminism. She's trying to introduce new aspects that may not have already been considered in feminism and also in anti-racist analysis. Right? Now, what are these new aspects? What are these new dimensions that she adds? That's something that we need to look at. Okay. Now, the first point that she makes vis-a-vis this kind of an expansion is that she questions the single-axis framework, what she refers to as the single-axis framework of feminism or anti-race understanding. What do we mean by single axis framework? Single axis means that either we are focusing on gender or we are focusing on the question of race alone. And this becomes the starting point of Crenshaw's argument. She says, and I'll quote, "In race discrimination cases, discrimination tends to be viewed in terms of sex or class privileged blacks, and in sexual discrimination cases, the focus is on race and class privileged women." Unquote. Now, this quotation might appear to be a little involved, so we need to spend a little time over here. So what she's trying to say is that when we look at the cases of racial discrimination, over there, the focus seems to be, on those who are the privileged blacks, okay? And when we talk about the sexual discrimination or the cases of sexual discrimination, over there, the focus is on the class privileged women. So what do we notice? We see that common concern that Crenshaw is bringing our attention to is that even as these theoretical frameworks of anti-race or feminism attempt to, speak for the disenfranchised, they attempt to speak for those who have been marginalized, but somewhere these theories as well, according to Crenshaw, maintain certain idea of privilege, right? So while talking about racial discrimination, the focus according to her remains to be on the class privileged blacks. And while talking about sexual discrimination, the focus according to Crenshaw continues to be on the class privileged women. And this, as she says, and I quote, focus on the most privileged group members marginalizes those who are multiply burdened, unquote. Now, very important over here is the word multiply burdened, and this is, the start of, or we can say the beginning of her intervention. What is she trying to say? She's saying that when there is a focus on just the privileged groups, in the society, when feminist school of thought or when anti-racist, ideology just focuses on the experience of the privileged, women or privileged black men, what they fail over there to do is that they fail to look at those individuals who are multiply burdened, which means what? Who are not privileged, who do not have a privilege of either gender or race, and who are then also marginalized, along other lines. So she says that this, multifaceted, so to say, a dimension of marginalization has not really been taken into consideration so far. Okay, now the next thing in the essay one notes is that where she seems to be talking about the reason behind her intersectional position, that why does she feel that we need to have this multiple axis understanding of or this multiple axis approach to the question of gender and race. Why does she feel that these different kinds of marginalities need to be together taken into consideration? What is the reason behind this kind of a intersectional position? Now for this, let's look at the quote from her essay. And she says, "Black women are sometimes excluded from feminist theory and anti-racist policy discourse because both are predicated on a discrete set of experiences that often does not accurately reflect the interaction of race and gender." So this is her starting point, where she says that black women, that's her observation, that how black women are often excluded from the feminist theory and the anti-racist policy discourse because in the figure of the black woman, we see an intersection of two important concepts, that is the concept of race and the concept of gender. But in the existing understanding, theories look at one of the two aspects, either the question of gender or the question of race. Now let's not forget that she is writing this essay around the time of the late 20th century, which is 1989. So this position of hers then is based on to what extent the feminist thought had developed at that time. So at that time, this kind of a amalgamated or if we can call it a comprehensive approach to the women's question was not there, and that's what Crenshaw is bringing our attention to as well. Okay, now she explains this concept of the intersectional position or the intersection with an analogy of the traffic intersection, right? Now, before I go on and discuss the analogy that she gives, what do we mean, first of all, by this term intersection? What is the literal meaning? We've been using it right since the beginning of the lecture. Intersection means coming together, right? Where multiple things cross path. Okay, so that's what we mean by intersect. Like even in mathematics, we have the intersecting lines, right? Which anything that, or maybe let's say that multiple things that meet at a common point. That's what is intersection. So now, what kind of intersection is she talking about? She is talking about intersection or commonality or coming together of different subject positions, vis-a-vis the marginalized in society. And she is using that to understand the question of discrimination and subordination. Okay. Now, coming back to the question of analogy. Now, what is the analogy that she gives in the essay? I just mentioned that she gives the analogy of the traffic intersection. And let's look at this, description. It's a slightly longish reference, but let's try to pay attention. She says, and I quote, "Consider an analogy to traffic in an intersection, coming and going in all four directions. Discrimination, like traffic through an intersection, may flow in one direction, and it may flow in another. If an accident happens in an intersection, it can be caused by cars traveling from any number of directions. Similarly, if a black woman is harmed because she is in the intersection, her injury could result from sex discrimination or race discrimination," unquote. Now, what is she trying to say in this, longish reference? First, she establishes that how, when we look at the literal, traffic intersection, what happens? There's traffic that comes from various directions. So, in fact, she says that traffic seems to be coming and going in all four directions. Okay. Then she says that even discrimination, like traffic. So she's essentially trying to understand the idea of discrimination through the example of traffic. So just like at an intersection, traffic comes from all four directions, or traffic comes and goes in all four directions, similarly, even discrimination, like this traffic through an intersection, may flow in either in one direction or it can flow in multiple directions simultaneously. Okay? So that much is clear, that she is drawing a parallel between discrimination and traffic, and the direction that a traffic or discrimination takes, and that direction can be either one side or it can be multiple sided at the same moment. Okay. Now, when she says that discrimination can be multiple sided or let's say multiple or multidimensional, what is she trying to say? She's essentially trying to tell us that how there can be varied manifestations, or there can be varied aspects of discrimination that one may notice at a particular moment. Okay. Now, in the next part of her explanation of this analogy, she says that if an accident happens in an intersection, okay, now she's talking about some kind of a accident, some kind of a mishap which happens in an intersection of the traffic. Now, that accident can be caused by cars traveling from any number of directions. Now, again, she draws a parallel to this with the position of a black woman. Over there, accident, has a parallel in a kind of a event of discrimination. So she says that when a woman or when a black woman is harmed or is discriminated against, the reason cannot be just one, right? The reason can be, or as she says, that her injury could result from sexual discrimination or racial discrimination, or for that matter, even both. Okay, so that's how she explains, the idea of intersection by using this analogy of traffic intersection. Okay, so the crux remains that how it is multidimensional, discrimination can take multiple forms vis-a-vis one particular individual. So there's not just one kind of subjugation that we may focus on, but at the same time, in the case of a particular individual, there can be multiple, kinds of, one can say, marginality that are at work. Now, next, she makes a point where she talks about the uniqueness of the prejudice faced by the black woman. So let's understand that how in this essay, her focus is the experience of the black women, okay? And through that uniqueness of experience, she's come upon this idea of intersectionality, okay? Now she says, and I quote, black women can experience discrimination in ways that are both similar to and different from those experienced by white women and black men, unquote. What is she doing here? She is trying to establish the unique subject position of the black women. She says that the experience of marginality or the experience of, unjust treatment by a black woman can be both similar and also, it can be similar to, and it can also be different from the experience of discrimination faced by a white woman or a black man, right? So she is then establishing this kind of a unique position of the black woman, and hence, the need for us to look at her, her particular question and how to address this kind of a marginality vis-a-vis black women, right? Now, next, then she goes on to point out in the essay that how the markers of discrimination then are actually based in some kind of a privilege. Now, remember, we had made this point earlier on in the essay as well, but we try to look at it once again, whereby she talks about the markers of discrimination that are based in privilege. Okay. Now, what kind of a privilege is it? That's something that we will, discuss at further length in the next part of the lecture. But in this segment, what we have seen is first the idea that how Kimberly Crenshaw becomes an important, scholar to kind of open up the frontiers of feminist thought and that of the anti-racist thought as well. How does she open up the frontiers, or how does she broaden the frontiers? By questioning the single axis framework of analysis, whereby she says that the focus need not be only on the question of gender or race alone. We need to look at it in conjunction. Next, she says that therefore we need to understand the position of the multiply burdened, those individuals who in whom different kinds of marginalities coincide. And for that purpose, she takes the question of the black woman to further explain her concept. Then we see that, she talks about the reason behind what propels, her intersectional position, or what made her think about this. And what was the reason? The reason was that how black women, according to her, were kind of excluded from the feminist theory and the anti-racist policy. So this particular unique position of the black women, according to Crenshaw, was not sufficiently addressed by either feminism or the anti-racist policy discourse. And this is what made her think about the fact that we need to develop an alternate view, an alternate framework that takes into consideration this aspect of multiple marginalities rooted in the person of a black woman, right? And next we talked about this analogy of the traffic intersection that she gives in order to explain her idea of intersectionality, where she shows that how discrimination at a particular point of time can be from different sources, can arise from different reasons. There is no just one kind of discrimination that acts vis-a-vis an individual in a given moment, and the occasion of hurt, the occasion of injury, the occasion of subjugation cannot only be explained vis-a-vis gender or race. It is important for us to look at the intersection of both these standpoints, particularly in the case of black women, right? So these are the points that she talks about in the initial parts of her essay, and she also talks about thereby the unique position of the black women and how we need this kind of a new framework to address their question. Now, the other arguments that she makes in the essay will be discussed in the next part of the lecture. Thank you.